Welcome back to the Best Worst Thing podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Leland. My next guest is an educator based out of Vermont, a career where she has done so much to help shape the lives of young children, second graders in particular. After Senator Bernie Sanders decided to wear mittens made from recycled and repurposed materials, she has suddenly found herself gaining a lot of national and international attention. Those famous mittens, as you've seen this past winter, or were tweeted, posted, memed around the world, have led to a lot of attention and fun and joy. But on top of that, it's really led to a lot of good causes, including raising over $1 million for Vermont charities with Bernie Sanders. She has continued to carry the torch with this heartwarming series of events into causes for good. And you can support some of these great causes by getting your very own products now actually through Vermont Teddy Bears at vermontteddybear.com. And you can also find our guest at generositybringsjoy.com or follow her at VT Awesomeness. Please welcome Jen Ellis.
Good, Josh. It's great to be here.
Well, it's great to have you. And again, I appreciate you being here and spending time with me and letting the listeners get a chance to know a little bit more about you. I know you were inundated by a lot of requests, and so this just really means a lot to me. So, of course, we're going to get into the story about the mittens, but if you could just tell our listeners a little bit more about you, like the mittens is not all you. So, we've heard you're an educator. Tell us a little bit about your current role and kind of what you do there.
Sure. I'm a second grade teacher in a small rural Vermont school in the town of Westford. It's a pre-K through 8th grade school, and there's one class per grade. So I'm the second grade teacher at that school. And I've been there for 10 years. And before that, I taught in Montpelier for 5 years. I taught first, second, and third grade there. And before that, I actually taught in rural North Carolina. I taught high school English, and I was placed there with Teach for America. So I've been at it for quite a few years at the teaching career. And I've done a few other little things in between, like in between my high school teaching career in North Carolina and Montpelier. I worked at a rape crisis center, and I worked at a child abuse prevention center, and also the Chittenden Solid Waste District, helping them to get composting programs into schools and teaching kids about recycling. So there's always been sort of an education theme through my career.
It really does sound really consistent. I'm just kind of curious about what made you, where do you think that comes from, that interest and desire to be in education? Like, what drew you to that field?
Well, let's see. I really love the moment when a kid figures something out. And I try to create opportunities for kids to figure things out on their own, right? Like to write their own algorithms in math rather than to learn one that somebody else created. I love that moment when kids realize that they're readers, that they can read chapter books and that they can write, and they start thinking of themselves as writers. And I also love the way that kids teach me things. They have qualities that I emulate. And so I love learning from them too.
I bet I know a lot of people in all levels of education. That last statement about kids teaching you something is kind of a really special quality. It kind of gets away from the arrogance of being the teacher depositing knowledge and information on the people around us, but the ability to actually have it be kind of a reflective process, that back and forth bounce. So there's this kind of strengths-based, strengths quest, strengths finder. And one of the strengths is maximizer. And, people who really love seeing people get the most out of their lives. I fall in that category. Like, I love seeing people who are undefeated, or people who have extreme success, or even in this case, like the bounce back, people who've been in a rough situation and have found a way to win at whatever they're struggling through. And that's what your statement reminds me of, which is like just that moment of discovery, that moment of like acceptance, that moment when they realize I got this thing. Like that's just a beautiful, beautiful moment. I never really kind of framed education in that sense. That's been able to sustain TFA and 15 years, that's been able to sustain a pretty good career so far.
Yeah. And I think also, I love what you said about maximizer, because that's one of the things I really try to instill in my students is happiness for each other, right? Like, so if a student in the class is particularly good at something, rather than feeling jealous of that student or envious, I try to show the kids that they can feel happy for the successes of their peers, and if somebody wins a basketball game, then, you should feel happy for them, even if you weren't there, just to be happy for the accomplishments of others is it's a great skill to have. And you have to model that and praise kids when they do that sort of thing. When they just say, I'm so happy that you advanced to the next skiing level, or that you learned how to spell that word,
Yeah. It's so interesting that, there's certain perspectives on human nature where, there's this competitive drive for some people, and some people have it like way more than others. But what you're talking about is almost this other higher level of education. It's beyond, it is math, it is reading. It's the important things that help a young person transition to the next steps of their academic career, potentially their future life. But these are like bigger life important lessons that people can incorporate. Did you always have that first philosophy of really trying to teach these bigger lessons in your educational approach, or was it something that you've developed over time?
Both. I mean, I've emulated my own teachers, throughout my whole career. And a lot of who I am came from them. I learned a lot of great things from my home and my parents, but I learned, even more great things. I mean, in addition to what I got from my parents, from my teachers. And so when I became a teacher, I wanted to be what my teachers were to me. I wanted to teach them more than just the academics. And as I've grown in my career and as an adult, I've actually had more to teach, because people are not stagnant. At least I'm not. Most people aren't. And as I've learned new skills, I've been able to share that with them. For example, one of the things I'm working on right now is having a growth mindset. So instead of thinking of myself as like, I'm terrible at XYZ, I try to reframe it as, I don't know how to do XYZ, or I need to find someone to help me learn how to do this thing, because I can grow and I can get better if I put my effort in that arena. When my students have a growth mindset, they get so much farther than if they're in sort of a fixed mindset of they already know what they're going to know.
That's a really beautiful way to illustrate growth mindset. And, for listeners who are paying attention to this, you really can, you do this with second graders, but you're doing this for adults, who are listening to this podcast. I even have a couple listeners in France and Vietnam and some other places. And so truly international scope but you are an educator, because the way you frame that is perfect, right? It's not the full sentence stop of, I can't do this, right? It's a very different approach to where you're looking for ways to kind of reframe it towards how can I get there, which is really critical. You did bring up your family, and for me, my biggest influences have been teachers and my mother, and actually some parent figures with Ken and Debbie Kellogg, of course, but my mother, number one teacher, and teachers were the most important people in my life, and they're the reasons why I chose to get into education. And so, I'd love to get a feel for your kind of family and your background. Like, where are you from? What was that like? Whatever you'd like to share with us.
Sure. I grew up in South Portland, Maine. I lived with my mom and my brother. My parents were divorced, but we had a great relationship with my dad. We went to see him every other weekend. and he lived in New Hampshire. So that was a 3-hour drive. Every Friday night, my mom would drive us halfway, and my dad would pick us up and drive us the other halfway. And then on Sunday night, we would repeat that to go back home. And my parents are very different people, but they have wonderful qualities. My mom is very sensitive, and she's very intuitive. She's very social. She loves to talk. She loves to, she loves to find out all about what's going on with you and your family and your friends. My dad is a little bit more introverted, and he's very introspective. He's a man of few words, but he's a wonderful builder. He likes to build anything, but he recently built a boat from scratch or actually it wasn't from scratch, it was from a kit that he had purchased, but he did that during the pandemic. He built a boat. And my dad every year would take us on these epic camping and canoeing trips up in northern Maine. So he remarried and had 2 more kids, and I have a couple stepsisters too. So he would invite everybody to go on these canoe trips where we would canoe throughout the day, and then we would set up camp, and then we would pack up camp and canoe on. And that was in the Allagash Wilderness Waterway of northern Maine. So we have all kinds of really funny family experiences of being up there and lots of great memories. My dad's very outdoorsy.
That sounds like some really great experiences. I think you have a talent for telling stories. I think you should know that as well. You really paint the picture. And I put a note down here. Mom's the listener, dad's the builder. And in their own unique ways, because they're so different though, but they're both givers, right? She's giving an ear, he's building for things and for people and for experiences. And so just, what a combination, that kind of formed your upbringing and experience.
Even in their jobs, they were that way. My mom was a social worker and my dad was a physician. And so they were givers. They wanted to help people.
Yeah. That ethic of service and care really kind of leads us into this next part, which is let's get into the conversation about these famous mittens. It's been exciting to observe and watch both the news coverage, but also to some of the successful things and collaborations you've been able to do. But let's talk about how did you get into making repurposed goods?
Well, actually, a friend of mine showed me a pattern that was online about how to make mittens out of wool sweaters. And I thought it looked like a cool pattern. I always liked to sew, and I had sewed a number of quilts. So I found an old wool sweater and I cut out the pattern and tried it out. And my first pair of mittens was so horrible. We jokingly put it on our snowmen. Like when we make a snowman with sticks, we'll put those terrible mittens on that stick, the stick arms of the snowman. But so we modified the pattern a lot to make it fit our hands, and then together, this friend and I would make mittens, and sometimes we would go to craft fairs, and sometimes we would sell them in craft stores in Vermont. But then I had a baby, and I was really too busy to make the mittens, and she was busy too. So we stopped making them together. And on the side, I would make a few here and there. I was making them for my daughter's preschool teachers one holiday season. And my daughter's, the director of my daughter's preschool is Bernie Sanders' daughter-in-law. And so that's how I ended up getting the mittens to him, because I really like Bernie Sanders. And so I wasn't really making mittens to the same degree as I had in the beginning, but I was mostly giving them as gifts, and I gave one to him.
Yeah. And that was the beginning of it. I remember when people initially started posting pictures on Instagram and Facebook, and then I started seeing it being covered on the news, and And Jen, honestly, I didn't even make the connection to you. I just was like, oh, this is some funky, cool mitts, and Bernie's being Bernie, like that, just the way we like him. He's being who he is. And then, all of a sudden it's like, wait, no, this is Jen Ellis. Like this is Jen, and so, it's super exciting to see all the potential of where things are going with this. I know Bernie's been able to raise a significant amount of money and resources towards local charities in Vermont. I know that you're doing a lot of things that are going in that same direction. And now there's this collaboration with Vermont Teddy Bear Company, which is, pretty cool. But in the end, I was listening to one of your interviews on NPR, and I think it was that interview where you're like, I'm a school teacher. Like I'm going to be a school teacher. This is who I am. So despite all this attention and continued growth and success in this particular area, to the ability to do good, you're still an educator in your core.
Yeah, I mean that's what I'm good at. Like I am a teacher, and I've worked at it for years and years and years. Just really honing in on that craft of teaching. I mean, I'm also good at making mittens, but there's no way I could make mittens for all the people who want to have them, yep. Which is where Vermont Teddy Bear comes in, because they actually can do that, and they produce a very high quality product. I mean, their teddy bears are extraordinary. And so I have a lot of confidence that they will make the mittens to my standards. I think that they will make an amazing product, and everybody will have access to it. And when this first happened, a lot of people were like, you could charge $1,000 for your pairs of mittens. And I was like, that's a terrible idea, because people should not spend $1,000 on mittens. There are people who are hungry.
Yeah.
There are people who can't make their rent. There are people who can't heat their homes or are having to choose between medication and food. People should not spend $1,000 on mittens unless it's for charity. So that is kind of where I moved in the direction of like, well, I will make some for charity, because if someone wants to spend a lot of money, then it should go to charity. And there are some people who have that kind of money to spend.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody else who wants a high quality pair of mittens should get them from Vermont Teddy Bear. And because they're taking care of that, I can continue to teach and be a mom and a partner. And I can continue living my life the way that I was living it before, because the truth is I loved my life before. It's different now and I still love it. But before the Bernie Sanders mitten thing, my life was just pretty great, and it wasn't perfect, but it was my life. And I want to keep that. I didn't want to stop being who I am to go be someone else because of Bernie Sanders' fashion choice on Inauguration Day.
Yeah, absolutely. There's this kind of self-awareness that comes along with that choice that you made. I had a talk with some students before this conversation about, their careers and authenticity. And a big part of that conversation, when they're thinking about like my personal brand, my professional brand, is like, do you know yourself? Like, what's important to you and why is it important? And once you identify those things that are valuable to you, then you should be making decisions in alignment with those things. So sure, yeah, you could push down this other track of, trying to get into the game of I don't know, selling $1,000 mittens, but does that really align with who you are, something you've been at for a long time and that you're actually really, really good at, which is this education piece, and also the ability to engage and connect and support your family in the ways that you are. And I think that's an important piece. I think there's a lot of people who want to jump and take the shortcut or the fancy thing because they think like this is lucrative or it's really important. But there's a lot of us out here who took the money opportunity and paid the price afterwards because it was misaligned, right? We were not in alignment with what was really important to us. And I think that your level of thinking on that is really important. It's really important for people to consider. So we are going to take a brief break and we'll get back with a big question. right, we're back. As you know, this podcast is the best worst thing. And for listeners, whether this is your first episode or if this is your 21st episode, this is the part where our guests share a story of a personal or professional situation where they experience a setback. So the questions are like, what happened? How are you working through it, or how did you work through it? And what are lessons that you've learned that you want other people to take away? So Jen Ellis, what is your best worst thing?
Well, most recently, the best worst thing really has been the mitten. The mitten. I don't know what to call it. Tornado, hurricane, because it really was very unexpected. And I'm a person who likes to know what's going on in her life. And when this happened, my life felt pretty out of control for a couple of weeks. And it was very stressful because I needed to make some decisions, and there were a lot of people watching and judging. And most people were judging me favorably, but some people weren't. And, it was hard to eat. It was hard to sleep. I couldn't make my brain turn off. And I remember there was one night, a few nights after this happened, where I was laying in bed and I couldn't sleep. And I realized that my partner also couldn't sleep. And so I whispered, "Are you awake?" And she was like, "Yes." Oh. And we had this moment of just like laying there together, talking and cuddling, and just, it was just so nice to be in it with her. But also I realized that, my enormous stress and anxiety over this situation also had spilled onto her and also our daughter. Yeah. So I think that this hasn't all been fun and games. It's actually been really hard to be put on the spot like this. And in a way also, though, it's been a wonderful thing because, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, I am a person who is trying to have a growth mindset. So this situation occurred, and I was called upon to do things I didn't know how to do. For example, I needed to manage a lot of media, and I didn't know how to do that. So I found somebody who did. My good friend Deb Flanders, who is she's a travel agent, and her travel agency is on hold, obviously, because of the pandemic. And it just so happens that a lot of her skills as a travel agent are the same skills that you would need to manage an international mitten frenzy. So I'm so thankful for her. I had to hire a lawyer. I've never done that before. I mean, aside from buying a house, but, I had to hire a business lawyer. I've had to do a lot of things that I didn't know how to do. And I've approached this by saying, I don't know how to do this, but I want to learn. And in the process of learning, as long as I'm choosing good teachers, I will get better. And so I'm still in that place. It's hard to be at that place at my age. I'm 43, and there are times when I felt like I had some things figured out, and then all of a sudden I didn't. So this has been the best and worst thing. But when some more time has passed, I hope that my reflection of it is that it was a good thing, and that I'm proud of how I handled it, and that I didn't move in the direction of capitalism, right? Like I chose instead a direction of caring for other people and trying to spread the joy. We are programmed we live in a capitalist society, and I think that it's worth really considering what does bring us joy. Is it making money, or is joy something else? I would argue that it's something else. And I would argue that part of joy is generosity. And part of joy is just recognizing when joy is in your lap, when you're happy, seizing that moment, playing with your kids while they're small, playing with anybody, like just having fun, going sledding, even if you're an adult.
Absolutely.
Having a snowball fight. There's a lot of joy right in your fingertips.
Absolutely. We were we're part of a tilt circle where one of the people today said it's kind of bogged down by the weather and everything. And she lives in Chicago. Hey, Sarah. And so Sarah said, I went for a walk and, decided to do snow angels. And people were like, why is this person doing this adult doing snow angels? And she was like, you know what? It's snowy here. It's cold. But, finding a way to find joy. It's interesting. Joy is in the generosity. Joy is in the generosity. Oftentimes when people are going through depressive moments, it comes from a lot of different things, or stressful moments or anxious moments. The ability to focus on others and giving and what I can contribute is such a wonderful, it doesn't always solve everything for people, but it is a wonderful elixir, right? Even for a momentary relief of being able to not focus on your pain or your frustration or stress or your sadness, but to be able to give to others. And the work that you're doing, both as an educator and as a person who's now taken on this new, international, attended to venture, still has that foundation of generosity and giving. Some of the work that you're doing and how these different areas are providing opportunities, money, resources to many people is really important. And it's just another good reminder for all of us that we pay attention to that. And again, as any great teacher, which I never had you in the second grade, I guess I'm a little bit older, but what I will say is, as any great teacher, you know how to illustrate things that you're teaching, this idea about growth mindset. And I think, again, people need to rewind this a little bit and listen to the original part of that Jen shared about growth mindset, because that's, I think, critically important. Jen, so I shared a little bit more earlier about the Vermont teddybear.com and VT awesomeness. But you have this website, generositybringsjoy.com. Can you briefly talk about that before we wrap up?
Yeah, I needed a platform to sort of put myself out there, a place for people to land if they wanted to know more about me. So I, with the help of my media manager, Deb Flanders, created a web page. And if you go there, you can hear my story. And also my mission now is to partner with companies who want to partner with me to make Bernie mitten themed products that benefit charity. Also, I'm making a few mittens here and there for charity. And so you can see that on generositybringsjoy.com. My favorite thing that's happened with the charities so far is I donated a pair of mittens to Outright Vermont right after the inauguration. And they quickly set up a website. They auctioned the mittens off for over $7,000.
Oh, wow.
And then the person who won them donated them back so that they could offer them to the second place winner and double their profit. And then that same person who won them is a business owner in Burlington. And he said, you know what? I'm going to give you $10,000 if you can raise another $10,000 in a week. So they reached out to all their donors and they raised $10,000 in a week. And there were some other things they were able to put on their auction website. So they auctioned off some crocheted Bernie dolls, I think. Some other little things that they were able to auction off, and people were able to make donations. In the end, they raised $42,000.
Oh my gosh.
And it was sort of a domino effect. It started with me giving them a pair of mittens. It took me 45 minutes to make that pair of mittens.
Yes.
And now they've expanded their summer camp for LGBTQ youth so that they can add an additional week, maybe 2. And how awesome is that? Right? Like that brings me so much joy, way more joy than selling that pair of mittens ever would have given me.
Perfectly illustrated, joy equaling generosity. So listeners, make sure you can, if you want to get the gloves, please check out Vermont Teddy Bear at vermontteddybear.com and make sure you get connected with that. Then, of course, generositybringsjoy.com, where there are a lot of ways in which you can find ways to be part of this movement of giving. Because, I think if one pair of mittens can turn to 42,000, imagine what we can do collectively to help the causes and the interests and people out there who are in need of support and making this a great experience. Jen, thank you so much for taking time with me this evening.
Thank you so much for having me, Josh. It was great to be here.
Thank you for listening to the Best Worst podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Lewa. Music is produced by Josh One. You can follow him at BoomNote on Instagram and Twitter, and Josh One on Spotify. Our episodes are edited by Cool Jets Audio and Visual. You can follow them at Cool Jets AV on Instagram. Our marketing is designed by Francesca Daniels. You can find her at FrankandKitty24 on Instagram. And our overall design is by Inspired Design with Ryan Daniels. You can find them at getinspired.design on Instagram. Thank you for listening to the Best Worst 25.
Trailblazer, maze, face your optics. I rocks this, cops this, blaze your boombox. The cool Cali kid from the boondocks. Bounce to your hood like Chaka with a crime on. Independent thing to play a beat, I get my rhyme on. So when I strut on a path to perfection, city to your borough, to your town, to your streets. Keep your party live, Josh One got beats out of nature. Grazer, Oakland, strays to Asia. Hits like Fraser, force of Fantasia. Move through your suburb, hiking in your